Notify the public that this meeting is recorded. Therefore, please be aware that an audio and visual recording of this meeting is being made by Boston City TV, a part of the City of Boston Office of Cable Communications, and is being broadcast on Xfinity Channel 26, RCN Channel 13, and FiOS Channel 962, as well as live streamed on YouTube. Wes, it is your meeting.
Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate that. Good evening, everyone, from me as well. We will just go ahead and begin our board meeting with the first thing on our agenda. We would call this meeting to order, do that officially. And I think we're all set with our agenda this evening, so we can move on to introductions, which is the second thing on our agenda. I think I will go ahead and go first. My name is Wesley Ireland. My name. I wanted to let you know, first of all, that I am a deaf man, and I will be utilizing 2 female sign language interpreters. So you will be hearing female voices while I'm signing, and they're telling you what I'm saying. I am the current board chair, and I live in the North End neighborhood of Boston. I will recognize each board member to introduce themselves as I see them on my screen. So we will start with Carl Richardson. Carl, I see you. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. My name is Carl Richardson. I live in Brighton. I've been in Brighton for almost 30 years now, and I identify as a deaf-blind individual. Thank you.
Thank you. Olivia, go ahead.
Sorry if I can ever unmute myself. My name's Olivia Richard. I'm a board member and I live in Brighton.
This is Wes. Thank you, Olivia. Next on my screen, I see Paul. Paul, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Paul Karen. I live in the West End, and I serve as an advocate for mental disabilities, as past and present members of my family have mental disabilities, and I work at the BPDA.
This is Wes. Thank you very much, Paul. Paulette, I see you next, ironically.
Ironically, good evening. I'm Paulette Durrett. I live in the Mattapan section of Boston, and I'm a board member.
Thank you, Paulette. Richard, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, good evening. I'm Richard Glovsky. I live in Back Bay. I'm a member of the commission, and I have a keen interest in kids' mental health.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Elizabeth, I see you. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Hello, I'm Elizabeth Jean Clower. I'm a board member, and I live in Dorchester. Thank you.
This is Wes. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. And I would also like to recognize Commissioner McCosh. Would you like to introduce yourself, please, Commissioner?
Hi, everybody. I'm Krista McCosh. I'm the Disability Commissioner and ADA Title II Coordinator for the city, and happy to be here.
Great, Commissioner. Thanks so much. Okay, I believe that is all the board members that I can currently see on the screen. Unless I missed anyone, are there any board members who have not yet introduced themselves? Okay, seeing none, then I think we can continue moving on with our agenda. And the next thing we have after introductions is the approval of the minutes from our prior meeting. We have a quorum, just barely by the skin of our teeth, but we do. So we can go ahead and approve the minutes from last month's board meeting. Does anyone have any comments about or questions about the minutes as received before we make a motion to approve the minutes from February 2024?
This is Carl. I make a motion to approve the minute.
This is Paulette, I second.
This is Wes. Great. Okay. Thank you. So Carl has made a motion to approve the minutes from the February meeting, and Paulette has now seconded that motion. All in favor, please raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
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 Great. Did I miss anybody opposed? Okay. Seems to have passed unanimously. The minutes from the February board meeting are accepted as read, or excuse me, approved as read. And again, I want to say happy March. As we go through the spring months now, we are getting closer to the time when we're thinking about green things. But I'm not talking about St. Patrick's Day, am I? I'm talking about green as in outdoors, as in the grass and the trees and the spring flowers that we're hopeful to see soon. And today we have a presentation from the Green Canopy and Green Infrastructure. So I'm really honestly very personally excited to see information from other countries, particularly in Europe, and so very happy to have the speakers with us today, Kate England and Todd Mistor. Please feel free to take the floor when you're ready.
Well, good evening. So I'm not sure if, is Kate England in the meeting? Oh, there she is, okay. So I'm Todd Mistor. Hi, go ahead, Kate.
I'll share the screen. Hi, everybody. Kate England. Nice to meet you.
So then, Kate, will you have to advance the slides then? Is that how this will work?
I think so. Say next slide, and I'll click forward.
Sounds good.
Perfect.
So again, a little bit of introduction of myself. I am Todd Mistor. I am the Director of Urban Forestry with the Parks Department. And I've been in this role just over a year. And actually, that's as long as the role has been around with the Parks Department. This really came about as a planning process that the Parks Department went through, and they devised an urban forest plan. And that is a framework for the next 20 years of looking at ways to increase the tree canopy across the city. Now, as it was mentioned before our presentation, that this is the time of the year that people think about green things, but really it's something we need to be thinking about and planning about all year long. So in the Urban Forestry Division, we are not just thinking about trees and growing things as we get into the spring, but we are definitely thinking about this 12 months out of the year. So if we could go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, in 2022, the city released an urban forest plan. And the idea behind this was, again, looking at the existing conditions and collecting a lot of data about the trees that are across the city and all the benefits that they provide and how we can maximize and increase those benefits over the next 20 years. Again, there's a lot of strategies that they came up with, and some of them are, of course, little lower hanging fruit and things that we could achieve within maybe 5 years, but a good portion of them are things that might be achieved within the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And so I just want to pull out a few facts from this, a few details from the urban forest plan. And one of the things that we discovered when looking at the city as a whole, that there is really only about 40% of the land across the city is under public ownership in one way or another. And then another 60% is considered privately owned. So if you look at that map of the city there on the side of the slide, all of that red, again, obviously the majority of the city is property under private ownership. And at this time, we don't have any ordinance or regulation regulating what goes on with those trees or dictating what goes on with those trees on private land. So essentially, a private landowner can do just about anything they want with the trees on that private property. But on the city-owned property, that's where we can have the most impact currently with the set of regulations that we have. So that's what we're really focusing on, and that includes trees along city streets, and then of course in city parks, and then all other city facilities. So just as an average, if you took the entire city, we have an average canopy coverage of 27%. So 27% of the total land area is covered with tree canopy in one form or another. Again, as I mentioned, that 60% of that is under private ownership, but even with that 40% that is under public ownership, even that's a bit complicated. And so, as I said, I represent the Parks Department, and we do care for the trees along city streets and in city parks. But then, some of that public realm is owned and managed by Public Works, by facilities management like City Hall and libraries and police stations. And then you've got the Transportation Department, which plans and does things with the actual streets. You've got the Boston Housing Authority, which owns large parcels of land across the city. You've got public schools, which are their own entity, and they have large parcels of land. And then, of course, there's statewide entities, which are public entities with Massport, and then the State Department of Conservation and Recreation, which owns, surprisingly, a number of streets in the city, as well as a number of parkland. Usually the streets are adjacent to parkland that they would own and manage. So it's a complicated thing that we're talking about when we're talking about just trees on public land. So just kind of wanted to put that in perspective as we sort of look at what we can do and what we are doing relating to trees. So if we can go to the next slide. And in just a quick note here, as I mentioned, across the city, the average canopy coverage is 27%. But that is in no way even across the city. As you can see in the, I would call the oldest part of the city, there around the bay, around the water, where it was kind of the most industrial development historically, that's where you have the least amount of tree canopy coverage. As you go to the south part of the city in Hyde Park and West Roxbury, those areas have a lot more trees, so a lot more canopy coverage. So again, the canopy coverage is in no way equal across the city, and some of those neighborhoods, if you notice like East Boston, South Boston, and like the downtown area, Charlestown, they all have canopy coverage at 10% or below 10%. So that is, less than half of the average across the city. But as I mentioned, those are very industrial areas or historically industrial areas, and they developed in a different way than perhaps West Roxbury did. So it's not that simple of just knowing that we need more trees there, because we have to make sure we have space for those trees to grow, and then space for everything else that goes on the street. And of course, the main concern of this group, and a concern as we move forward with the Parks Department, is accessibility. The sidewalks are narrow and the sidewalks are limited. So how do we make sure that we can improve things like canopy coverage, but at the same time, at the very least maintain or perhaps even improve the accessibility of our city sidewalks, not only making sure that the surface is accessible, but making sure that it's a pleasant place as well, to have that shade canopy and all the benefits of trees. So if we can go to the next slide. So ultimately, our urban forest plan had two main goals. The main one is equity first. So those areas that were, historically marginalized or didn't have huge investments of resources, making sure that we're correcting that we're making sure resources are directed there. So it's not going to be an equal distribution of resources to every area of the city, but again, making sure that everybody has access to the same quality of life, the same type of assets, the same type of amenities and resources in their neighborhoods. So that may mean that places like South Boston or East Boston may require more resources when it comes to trees than places like West Roxbury. Again, not that we we won't be doing anything in a place like West Roxbury, but we have to understand that there's some historical inequities that we have to work to address. And, we address this through our regular operating budget. And through that, we have, capital work that we do with tree planting and, of course, work in parks and things like that, and the operations of our tree crews and our contractors. But we're also looking for other ways to supplement that. And one thing that some of you may have heard of in the past few months is this Urban and Community Forestry Grant, which is a federal grant which was awarded to the city. We applied for this last spring. The awards were announced at the end of the summer. And at this point, we're still, going through all the paperwork of finalizing everything with the federal government. And this is a grant over the next 5 years. And it specifically addresses these environmental justice communities, these census tracts that are identified as environmental justice areas under, federal tools. So we really took kind of a broad approach with this grant, which I think is why we were awarded it. And there's a couple of main components. One of these is the Boston Tree Alliance, which is, not part of our Urban Forestry Division, but is actually seed money that the city provided to Mass Audubon. And they are running a program of giving grants to community groups to plant trees on private property. Because again, that's something we can't do as the city. But as we pointed out in that first map, 60% of the property across the city is privately held. So in order to truly move the needle to increase our canopy coverage and the benefits, we have to make sure we're finding ways to get trees on private property, especially in those communities that have the lowest canopy coverage, that have excessive heat events, and that are just, feeling the burden of climate change and heat the most. So some portion of it goes to that Boston Tree Alliance. Another portion goes to PowerCore Boston, which is, I'll call it was a quasi-city organization that is now coming into being a city department, and it is specifically a workforce development component. And it is taking people from these environmental justice communities and making sure they have the skills to be employable and to work in green industries, specifically that area of forestry or landscaping. So it's a program that teaches them a lot of basic skills. And actually, in our Urban Forestry Division, we have hired 2 graduates of this program, and we have another opening that we're interviewing for in the coming weeks, and we're hoping to employ yet another PowerCore graduate. So again, some portion of this is going to making sure that people from those environmental justice communities have access to jobs in this field, and then they really become the best advocates for making sure that people are aware of the benefits of trees and will work to improve the existing conditions for trees and will help maintain the trees. They'll be good partners for us within those communities that need it most. And the final part is our forestry operating budget, the part that actually affects me and my division. And we really approach this from an accessibility standpoint. So we wanted to find ways to, again, improve canopy coverage, but also make sure that we're improving accessibility or working towards accessibility. And we took three approaches. The first being maintaining the trees that we have. That's the best way to get the benefits of canopy coverage. You need large trees to do that. And so the more effort we can put into pruning the trees, making sure that they're not impeding the sidewalk in any way, making sure that they're healthy and not dropping dead branches, that they'll be around for a lot longer, that will, again, increase the benefits that we can get from the urban forest. The second is installing trees with a flexi-paved surround. And this is sort of a new thing for us in Boston. There's been a few experiments with this, and this is, again, money that will help us as the Parks Department experiment have another tool in our toolbox to make sure that we can get trees in areas that need them the most, but without compromising that accessibility. And then a final thing just relates to keeping as many mature trees as possible, and that is treating mature ash trees to protect them against EAB, which is emerald ash borer, and it's an invasive beetle that can kill ash trees. So again, it's just about preserving the trees that we have and making sure that they're not an impediment on our existing built environment. So next slide. So again, proactive management is a big part of what we're doing. So just a couple pictures and things that we've been doing. On the left there is actually the injection of an ash tree to protect it against emerald ash borer. So that's a program that we started last summer. Again, we have a tree inventory. We know where all the ash trees are at. We will keep records of when we've treated them, and it's every couple of years you have to treat them in order for them to sustain any damage against the emerald ash borer. Then the other picture is just our tree crew doing some work out there. They're actually working on a construction site or where there's construction vehicles. Again, making sure the construction vehicles don't damage the tree, which could cause harm or eventually be a source of disease for the tree. So again, being proactive in the work that we're doing. And the next slide. And I think this is kind of the part that really relates most to this group. And this is trying to make sure we're incorporating new approaches into what we're doing. Because we know we need to think differently in order to really achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And that is increasing the canopy coverage across the city, and especially bringing up those areas of lowest canopy, increasing the canopy as much as we can in those areas. And the picture here on the left, it's an area of sidewalk, and I have two blue lines there. And that area between the blue lines is actually this flexi-pave, or permeable flexible pavement, or another name or another type, it's resin-bound aggregate, where it's like concrete, but water infiltrates through it rather than just running off of it. So it is porous, and of course flexible, as I mentioned. So as the tree roots grow under it, it'll have a little bit of give, and rather than cracking and becoming dislodged, it may be a more gentle ramp so that it still has some accessibility for people with mobility issues. So this is actually an installation that was done a couple years ago by Public Works. But again, using this federal grant to do more installations like this, and again, I think Kate's going to talk about this as she talks about green infrastructure. She's been a big help to us in getting information and sharing resources so that, like I said, we have more tools in our toolbox to make sure that we can get trees in the most challenging places rather than just saying, oh, we can't do it there, we have to move on to the other place or the easiest place to plant trees. Ultimately we have to spend more money on getting the tree in the ground, not on the tree itself. We have good quality nursery stock, but it's that sort of preparation around the tree. If we have a greater investment in that, we're more likely to have that tree survive for years and decades to come so that we can have the benefits from that. The other picture is just me holding some bare root trees. That's not typically what we plant. It's about the size tree that we plant, but typically our contractors plant trees that are called ball and burlap. So it has a big root ball on the bottom, which is about 2 feet in diameter. And part of the difficulty with that is you need an opening in the sidewalk at least 2 feet in diameter to adequately dig around that and get that in the ground. So in some of these areas, like if we're trying to use flexible pavement, the opening itself might be narrow, even though there's a much larger area where water can infiltrate the roots. So we're trying things like if we can plant a bare root tree, maybe it's a little easier to get into narrow spots, but it may have a benefit in the future that it has a pretty developed root system that they can easily spread out as they get access to resources. And so again, just another experiment to make sure that we have the widest array of tools to make sure that we can move forward. And the next slide. And again, just kind of finishing up here, this is just something I'd like to talk about just to kind of put things in perspective for us. When we're talking about a typical city project or a typical capital project, right when you install the asset, that is its optimal performance. When you install street lights, when you repave a street, when you redo a park or install a play structure, right when you walk away, when the contractor walks away, that's when it's at its peak. And then from there, it slowly degrades over time. Urban trees are very different. In order to get the maximum benefit from them, we have to plant them, and that's not the maximum benefit. The trees that we put in the ground, they honestly provide very little benefit. We have to keep them alive and help them to thrive for the next 20 to 30 years before we start seeing some of those real benefits from them. So it's just a little bit different, just a different way of thinking about assets. And what do we have to do between that, putting the tree in the ground, putting that asset in the ground, and getting the maximum benefits from it? And to the next slide. Ultimately, this is about partnerships. It's about dialogue with groups like this. It's about us meeting, having the capacity to engage and meet with community organizations of any type, whether that's a neighborhood association, a church group, a block club, whatever it may be, friends of different parks groups. And that's what I have some pictures of here. In the last year, in the Urban Forestry Division, as we've increased our staffing, as we've increased our capacity, we're really working to increase our community engagement. One, to let people know we exist and the things that we do, and then to build those relationships, not only to get these trees in the ground, that's an important part of the relationship, but to make sure that people help us maintain the trees, especially in these sensitive first 3 to 5 years, but then in those next 5 to 20 years, as it's really growing and maturing and becoming, a valuable asset in the community. So right now, that's all I have to share about our urban forestry, and we're gonna kind of continue on with Kate speaking about what she's doing with green infrastructure.
So thanks so much, Todd. That was a really great intro that laid a lot of groundwork for what I'm going to talk about. So thank you, everybody, for having us. I'm Kate England. I'm the Director of Green Infrastructure for the City of Boston. I've been in my role since July of 2022, which is also as long as that role has existed. So Todd and I are both inaugural directors. So glad to see that the city is investing in this kind of new approach to, to greening our city. So I'm going to talk a little bit about green infrastructure and trees. So I wanted to start by setting the stage a little bit. So first, what is stormwater? You heard Todd mention stormwater during his presentation, and it's a key part of green infrastructure. And so I wanted to start with a quick definition. So we live in an urban environment where there is lots of hard surface. There's roadways, sidewalks, buildings, driveways, and other things. And so when rain falls in a city and lands on a hard surface, it can't absorb into the ground. And so that stormwater runs off the surface. And ultimately, it ends up in a catch basin or a storm drain, and then it ends up in our water bodies. So rivers, the Boston Harbor, and sometimes places like Jamaica Pond and other water bodies in the city. So we use green infrastructure as a way to better manage stormwater and to improve water quality. So green infrastructure uses plants and soil and a variety of other natural materials to allow water to absorb back into the ground and to filter out pollutants from our stormwater. There are two images on the screen right now. One is a picture of a rain garden, and the other is a right-of-way bioretention feature. And what these are is they are shallow, depressed areas where water from sidewalks and streets and roads can collect and absorb into the ground. And they are usually planted with native plants, flowers, trees, and other lovely green things. There are a couple of other types of green infrastructure that you may have heard of or may have, may be aware of in the city. Green roofs, which are vegetation on top of roofs. Constructed wetlands, which are like natural wetlands, except they were built by humans. Porous paving materials, which Todd mentioned a little bit in his presentation and will feature very heavily in my coming slides. And these are things like porous asphalt, porous concrete, grass pavers, or as Todd mentioned, permeable rubber surfacing and resin-bound stone. And then the last image on the screen is of a stormwater tree pit or tree infiltration pit. And there are many of these in the city of Boston right now. In fact, you've probably passed them in your everyday life and not even noticed that they were there, because at the surface, they look very similar to standard tree pits. They feel very similar to standard tree pits, but there's a lot going on underground. So we're going to show a couple of examples of trees and green infrastructure and how they go so well together. So one of the things that, there are 3 images up on the screen right now, and what these images are showing is some different types of porous pavers, which are, square stone blocks that are installed in the sidewalk or in plazas or in parks that have small gaps between them that allow water to absorb into the ground. There can be some problems with pavers from an accessibility perspective, because if they're not installed correctly, pavers can have gaps between them that pose difficulties for individuals using mobility devices, in chairs, or pushing strollers. And so we are going to show a series of examples of projects that have permeable pavers, as well as projects that use poured-in-place porous paving material, which is more of what Todd was discussing in his presentation. So there are 3 images on the screen right now, and these images are showing very common conditions in urban areas that you see around trees and tree pits in the sidewalk. So the first is an image that shows a tree with lots of roots exposed at the surface. So the sidewalk is typical kind of paneled concrete sidewalk. And then the tree pit is a more typical tree pit with a large opening in the sidewalk and a tree planted in it. The image that you're seeing, this first image, is showing roots that look like they're in really rough shape because they've been walked on. It looks like they very likely have had other damage done to them. And so I would say it's not a healthy or happy looking set of tree roots. Another image on the screen shows a tree pit that has had the soil settle in that tree pit. So there's a lip or a trip hazard that is very common in tree pits in the city. So if you're moving down this sidewalk and you encounter a tree pit where the soil level has depressed a little bit because folks have walked on it or the soil has just settled over time, this can pose a tripping hazard and also a hazard for young folks, for older folks, and really any folks. I know I trip on them all the time. And then the third image on the screen is another image that you're probably quite familiar with in the city, which is a concrete sidewalk panel that has been lifted up by the tree roots. And so Todd mentioned that this is a condition that we see in cities quite often, where sidewalks have been heaved up by tree roots. And frequently, the reason for that heaving is because the trees are seeking water and air for their roots. So people don't think often about tree roots needing access to air, but they do. And so when you have trees that are planted in very small tree pits or planted in an area where they're getting walked on a lot, the soil gets compacted and the roots can't get access to air. So they start to reach for the surface. And so when they reach for the surface, it pushes up the concrete sidewalk and creates inaccessible, impassable sidewalks. So this image is an image from Audubon Circle in the Fenway neighborhood. Audubon Circle is, we did a demonstration project here several years ago where we planted a couple of hundred trees, new trees. And the image on the screen is showing just a sidewalk during a rainstorm. It has a standard concrete sidewalk on one side and a porous paver sidewalk on the other. The concrete sidewalk is covered with water because the stormwater is not draining off of the sidewalk, which can be very slippery, can also pose passability issues if there are puddles and other things that form in the sidewalk. And then the porous paver side is drier. There are no puddles down the walking area, and the trees are looking pretty happy right now. Underneath, I should mention, underneath the porous pavers, there's also a large stone infiltration area. And what that means is there's a large area where stormwater can collect underground and slowly absorb into the ground, while the tree roots can also take up some of that stormwater to help them grow. So there's a really kind of nice environment underneath this sidewalk for trees to kind of grow and thrive. This image is another image from Audubon Circle, same location, just a different side of the intersection. And I wanted to show this one because it's on a sunny day. And what you're seeing in this image is a sidewalk that's a nice concrete sidewalk. It's ample width. I believe this is a 9 or 10 foot sidewalk width. And you can see that there are some lovely trees here that are quite young. These trees were only planted 4 or 5 years ago, and they are very, very large. And they're providing really beautiful shade on the sidewalk. I want to credit Commissioner Makash with something that she said in a meeting once, which was that shade and trees are fundamental and essential to accessibility. That moving down any urban sidewalk without any shade or without any tree cover is not an enjoyable experience. And if you are moving down that sidewalk at a slower speed or having to take breaks or having to navigate difficult terrain and you're doing it in the sun, it's even harder. So the stormwater infiltration features that we built in Audubon Circle have also resulted in trees that are growing very quickly and that are very healthy. And I've got a couple more examples of these, some before and after images. So the image that you're seeing right now on the screen is it's from Central Square in East Boston, one of the neighborhoods that Todd mentioned is very low on tree canopy in the city. And this is the before image. There's going to be a second after image. But in this image, there are construction workers who are installing porous pavers, and there are two rows of small young trees. Trees that were just planted. So they're about 2-inch caliper trees, which means their tree trunk is about 2 inches in diameter. And then in this after image, which was taken 5 years later, you can see that there's been a lot of growth in these trees. The trees have put on lots of caliper inches, which means their trunk is now, I think it's like 6.5 or 7 inches in diameter. Some really lovely tree growth. And the 2 rows of trees that were planted also are now, the canopies are touching, which means they're creating this really lovely shaded place for you to walk under and kind of between the trees. So the plaza, we had a lot of concerns from folks when we originally installed all, the new permeable pavers and the new trees, because the trees were very small. And, we said to the community, just wait. These stormwater trenches will feed the trees and the trees will grow very quickly. And now we have a couple of locations in the city, Audubon Circle, Central Square, and a few others that really show how planting trees in stormwater features and green infrastructure features can help them grow quickly. The image on the screen right now is also from Central Square. It is a side-by-side comparison of 2 trees that are the same tree species. They're honey locusts. They were both planted on the same day at the same time from the same nursery. They were the same size when they went in. The tree on the left side of the image was planted in a stormwater infiltration trench, and the tree on the right side of the image was planted in parkland. So not even in a sidewalk, just in parkland. And this image was taken during the 2022 drought, and you can see that the trees that were planted, the trees on the left side that were planted in the stormwater features still have their leaves. They're growing quite quickly. And the trees that are planted in the park were having a really hard summer because we did not get enough rain for them to really keep their leaves and to grow. So I like to show people a side-by-side comparison of the growth speed difference when you plant a tree in a green infrastructure feature versus when you don't. So Todd mentioned that the city is starting to use these poured-in-place porous materials as our kind of substitute for whatever paving materials we used to use around trees. So the images on the screen right now are from City Hall Plaza, so right outside of City Hall. And the image shows a resin-bound stone mix, which is very light in color. It's very similar to the color of concrete. It feels very similar to concrete when you walk on it in terms of firmness, it's level, and it's not slippery. And the image on the left shows a very small opening around the trunk of a new tree. So people are able to move through this space and get very close to the tree without rolling or walking into a tree pit, which is good for the tree and good for the humans. And then the image on the right shows some of these young trees that were planted in the last year or so in this large, resin-bound stone plaza. And the trees are very happy. They're growing nicely, and I'm actually about to pour water on the porous paving material to show people that water passes through it. So really, really excited to have this outside of City Hall Plaza or outside of City Hall, because we've been able to really show the public, this is a material that we're going to start using a little bit more often. And so these, the images on the screen right now are, one is they're construction detail, but it essentially shows how a resin-bound stone would be installed around an existing or new tree. And you can notice in this detail that, there's some stuff happening underground, so lots of space for the tree roots, lots of opportunity for water to absorb into the ground and for the trees to get access to that water. And then there's also this really nice porous surface with a little bit of a gap between the porous paving material and the tree trunk. So the tree trunk is getting a little bit of breathing room from the porous paving material. You don't want to install it right up against the tree trunk, but it's a small enough space that there's little risk of any person rolling an ankle or tripping or even getting stuck with a stroller or another mobility device. The images that are on the right side of the slide are showing that this material comes in all colors and sizes. So the material can be color matched to concrete, meaning that if you have low visibility or other visual limitations, the material will look very similar to concrete. So there's less of a concern around a change in material or a change in surface, because the surface stays the same. It's level and there are no drop-offs or tripping hazards. And by having a similar color, the surface reads as being very consistent. And then there's also a couple of other things that you can do. You can have smaller aggregate size or larger aggregate size depending on your uses. So there's an image on the screen right now that shows some dark colored aggregate that's around the trees, so that it shows this is a tree pit, maybe don't walk here. And then there's the light colored resin-bound stone that looks like a continuation of the concrete sidewalk. So just wanted to show folks what this might look like and what this might feel like, and how we in the city will start to use this, not just in our sidewalks to help increase the growth and health of our new trees and our existing trees, but also as a way to use this in other spaces, plazas, parks, schools, community centers, libraries, to increase the accessibility in these public spaces, as we're thinking about how we want to make our spaces more inclusive. So green infrastructure is actually really wonderful for accessibility. It helps our trees grow faster. It helps tree canopy develop faster, which means more shade, and generally is really great for water bodies and water quality as well. So I think that was my last slide. Yes, okay, so Todd and I think are gonna take questions, but thank you again for giving us some time today, and we really appreciate the interest in the work that we do. I'm not sure how questions typically work. Do I call on people or?
Hi, this is Wes Gear speaking. Kate, if you wouldn't mind taking off the slideshow, sharing that screen there, if you wouldn't mind, so we can have better visual access. Thank you. Okay, well, I would like to welcome the board members, and if there are any questions or comments. I do see Richard has his hand up. Go ahead, Richard.
Thanks, Wes. Todd and Kate, that was fantastic. My God, I feel like I learned so much tonight. You guys are, I mean, you're just great assets to this city. So thank you for what you do. It's fantastic. I'm trying, what my question is, how much of an impact do you think you can realistically make on the environmental issues that you're addressing? And how close can you come to your aspirations in that regard, how soon? From what I've read, and perhaps others too, and it's an awfully important work you're doing, and it's necessary, if not existential. So, kind of curious what your perspective is on all that.
Well, I guess I'll go first since I was the first in the presentation. Well, again, thank you for bringing these points up, Richard. And, you know, the way I see this is, you know, there's no one solution. I think what we're doing is important in terms of, you know, combating climate change or, again, being aware of all the issues that we have to be aware of out there. So I see this as, you know, there's many arrows in the quiver, or many prongs to this approach, right? And each one is equally important. I don't think you can say, well, we can, you know, just put less effort into one. I think that we all need to you know, to put the maximum effort in. So will we come close to our aspirations? I don't know. You know, I want to keep trying. I don't want to just say, I don't want to give it a shot, because it is absolutely important. The amount of water that trees take away from the stormwater, for stormwater mitigation. As Kate pointed out, as the commissioner has mentioned, that, you know, the shade on the sidewalk is absolutely important. You know, trees have so many values that we have out there. So again, I don't see trees as the only solution. I see it as part of a larger solution, but we have to apply whatever resources we can, whatever resources are available to maximizing those benefits. And then Kate, what do you want to add?
I definitely agree. And I will say that there are some really wonderful peer cities that are doing great work, that have started this work before we did, who have made really good progress in increasing tree canopy, who are making good progress in terms of accessibility, who have really impressive green infrastructure programs. And I think my goal and my hope is to be able to emulate those programs and to bring them to Boston, you know, to build a similar program here. We do have a really wonderful, you know, supportive community here that, you know, is now starting to ask for green infrastructure. They're starting to ask for trees demand trees really, in a much more proactive way. And I think that having that public support is really key to making real progress on our goals. And I know that from a climate resilience perspective, you know, reducing urban heat island, dealing with stormwater flooding, you know, and improving water quality and a variety of other things, including like air quality improvements and all the things we've talked about today, you know, even incremental change is a success for us. I mean, it's an improvement for the people who live here. It's an improvement for the individuals who live in the communities who are most affected. And so I think that I view my goals as being lofty and large, but also bit by bit, little by little, every improvement we make is a success. And so I think we've had some good changes that have been made in the last 2 years. We're starting to put policies in place at the city that require green infrastructure, that require, you know, green space, new green space, as well as, you know, my program very intentionally includes trees and as much green infrastructure as possible. And so I think we're also, in addition to, you know, Todd's division existing now and, you know, having my office in existence as well, we now have some really strong champions and some really great dedicated staff to this work. So I think that that's another thing that I would consider a leg up to meeting our goals. It's going to take time. I think we all acknowledge that trees don't become adult trees overnight, and all the sidewalks in the city don't get replaced overnight. So we've got a long road ahead of us, but I feel more optimistic now than I think I ever have in the past.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wes here. So I would like to recognize Paul has his hand up, and I think
She actually
has a
answered.
question or comment. Please go ahead.
Oh, I would just want to say it was a great presentation, she just answered my question, so thank you very much. But I thought it was a really nice presentation, and we learned a lot tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. This is Wes speaking. I actually have a question myself about it, but I will hold my question because I just saw Jerry put his hand up. So go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you, Wes, and I'm sorry if my question may have been answered. I had to step away just for a minute, but I too want to just echo, I thought it was a wonderful presentation, and thank you for all the wonderful information, and you're doing great work. You mentioned, I think Kate mentioned in one of her answers about, there's some wonderful cities that are doing making great strides in this work. I didn't know if you mentioned any of those cities, and if not, would you feel comfortable mentioning them now, and why you think they're doing such great work that we can emulate?
Absolutely. Sorry, I should have mentioned some of them, considering I look at them all the time. So I'll start with cities that have similar climates to ours, because it's unfair to compare ourselves to an area that has a climate that's more hospitable for, plant growth. Although we don't do too bad here. But I frequently look to Philadelphia, to New York, to Washington, D.C., Milwaukee, and Montreal are all doing really wonderful work in the green infrastructure field, in the tree canopy expansion area. Detroit is also doing a lot of urban greening. As industry has left Detroit, they are converting a lot of their old industrial properties back to parks, essentially, and food growing. So a couple of great examples. Philadelphia's program had focused very intentionally on converting unused parcels to stormwater parks and green space. New York City's program had focused on building bioswales, right-of-way bioswales, and planting trees in at least one, sometimes two, in those bioswales, and there are thousands of them across Manhattan now. DC, through a collaboration between the federal government and the district, which has like a municipal government as well, they have been doing a lot of work with water quality, but the way that they've been doing it is by building green infrastructure into their city and increasing tree canopy. Because a mature tree can take up, it's like 150 gallons of water from a single storm, and mature trees, plural, in large groups, take up even more. And so they were really focusing on addressing water quality issues and flooding issues by adding trees to their city. Other cities that have slightly different climates than us that are doing good work, Portland and Seattle are doing really wonderful, but they don't get the same kind of winter that we get here, which means that we have other issues that we have to deal with. Todd didn't mention and I didn't mention, but street trees that are not planted in stormwater features often struggle with salt. They get burned by excessive amounts of salt from the sidewalks and then spray from the roadway. And that is not an issue that they have to deal with in the same way where they don't get real winter climates, or real winter freezes. And I will say that stormwater features, stormwater trenches, provide some good flushing for salt. So, in Boston, we salt about 4 months out of the year during our winter. And then there are 8 months out of the year where we still get a good amount of rain, but we're not salting our sidewalks and we're not salting our streets. And so studies have shown from winter weather cities that trees that are planted in stormwater features get a good amount of flushing because they're getting stormwater all year round. And so salt does not have the same negative damaging effect on trees planted in stormwater features as they do when they're planted in standard tree pits, which is very cool and definitely something that I will be sharing more often and publicly, just as another reason to do this kind of work. So those are some good examples. The Southwest also has some great cities. Tucson, Arizona is doing amazing work with this. You would not think of a desert city as being somewhere where you could look to for greening and vegetating their cities, but they are doing amazing work. And then some of the cities in Colorado, Denver, and others are also doing some really nice work as well. So that was a long answer, but there are some really great cities that we can look to, and I'm happy to share some resources with the group after the fact if people are interested in seeing some of these programs.
Great, thanks again. I appreciate it. Great work.
Wes here. I guess I will go ahead and ask my question. So I'm the north end of Boston right now, in that area. I mean, I live here, I love it here, but I often notice when I visit other areas close to where I live, like
Beacon Hill.
Thank you, Beacon Hill. That I noticed that those sidewalks are typically very narrow. They're very narrow sidewalks. There are a lot of trees that make it hard to navigate, and I've noticed that some areas, well, really, you know, where well-established trees are, that some of those, you know, they're so old, you can see the trees are causing the, you know, that sidewalk to become damaged, for there to be dips and cracks. So I guess that leads me to my question then. So considering that in the city of Boston, with those issues in mind, and that,
What is the city doing about that?
and what investment can, you know, different agencies, associations make? And I guess I also, you know, how can we be further involved? And also,
Could we make 311 reports about these kinds of things when we see them in the sidewalks?
Yes, short answer is yes, but I'll answer pieces, and Todd, feel free to jump into, just because I'm going to answer from a green infrastructure perspective what we're trying to do to address this. Mature trees in narrow sidewalks are something that is very difficult to, I don't want to say solve that problem, because the trees are valuable and we want them to be there. But the question of how do you make a sidewalk more accessible when the passable walking width is like 2 feet wide. And so one of the things that the city, the Public Works Department and Transportation Departments are looking at is creating sidewalks that go around mature trees. So rather than asking folks to navigate that really narrow space between the mature tree and a wall or a building or something, providing another path of travel that is wider. So that's one thing that we're doing with the mature trees. Another is, and Todd mentioned this, is adding the resin-bound stone or flexible paving over sidewalks where the trees have heaved the concrete so badly that it can't be repaired with concrete. So using that permeable surface to create a more gradual slope over the roots so that the roots of the trees are not damaged, or at least not as damaged, and the path is as accessible as possible. For new tree plantings, because we're trying to prevent this from happening moving forward, we're doing a couple different things. So in collaboration with the Urban Forestry Division and with Public Works, my office is looking at piloting using that resin-bound stone for the width of the sidewalk, of 5-foot accessible width, and then having the tree pit, the opening, be smaller. So rather than doing the 3-foot by 6-foot or the 4-foot by 6-foot opening that is required in Boston, which sometimes can constrain the sidewalk, using the porous material to maintain that 5-foot width passable and clear. And then some of the decisions that need to be made are, if you have a narrow sidewalk, maybe we shouldn't be planting a tree that at its mature size will have a really large trunk. So thinking about right tree species for right location is really important. So using the full plant palette available to us and selecting narrower trees or smaller trees where the sidewalk must be constrained because the right-of-way isn't wide enough. So we're starting to think about that now, like proactively, whereas I don't think it was really part of the equation in the past in the way it should have been. We also know that by planting trees in the stormwater features that we talked about, using that permeable surfacing, that tree roots are less likely to reach for the surface because they're getting what they need underground. They're getting water, and because of the stone or the sand-based structural soil that they're being installed in, so the materials underground, they can actually get access to air as well. So we have seen, again, other cities who are much farther along than we are, trees that were planted a decade ago or more, they're not seeing roots come to the surface. And so they're not seeing the heaving. So we're just basically stealing good ideas from other people and trying to more proactively think about, pick the right tree species, pick the right, sidewalk treatment. Sometimes concrete sidewalk, like you saw in the Audubon Square pictures, is perfectly fine when you have enough width to make it work. But in areas where we don't, like a lot of our residential streets and smaller artillery streets do not have that kind of space, and so we have to adjust our materials and our designs to fit that. So again, I'm sorry, I'm giving really long answers today.
Well, if I could just add one thing there as well, because I think the question was specifically about Beacon Hill, and Beacon Hill is kind of a unique place with very narrow sidewalks, and it's a historic neighborhood with brick pavers for sidewalks. So again, all these things that Kate talked about, we absolutely are having better conversations now than we ever had in the past. And I think this is where it's good that we're talking to a group like this, because this actually is going to not just require Public Works and the Parks Department to talk about it, it's also going to require advocacy. Because in a place like Beacon Hill, I mean, there is no easy solution, I have to be honest. As Kate mentioned, planting the right tree in the right spot is something that we can do at least in the short term. The tree pits there are tiny, the sidewalks are tiny. If we do go around a tree to go out on the street, that takes away parking. Again, we have to make sure we have strong advocates for accessibility on sidewalks and understanding that in order to gain one thing, you have to give up another thing. And that, again, in a lot of places that may be parking. So again, just want to point out, we don't necessarily have these easy answers or immediate answers, but we do rely on, again, talking to groups like this and your advocacy to help make sure that we can move forward with best practices. Many areas of the city are very different than Beacon Hill, and we can more easily implement, permeable, flexible pavement or something like that. But again, Beacon Hill is a place that's going to require a lot more conversation. But hopefully, again, we can arrive at a reasonable solution.
This is Wes. I appreciate that. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Kate. I appreciate the challenges that each of the Boston neighborhoods will present, and I'm sure there will be a lot of variation in that as well. The three neighborhoods that I mentioned, Charlestown, the North End, and Beacon Hill, the three of them I think are the oldest neighborhoods in Boston. And I know that Kate had also mentioned those other cities across the U.S. that are doing amazing things with this kind of work. So I think the research that might be helpful, maybe I would point you to some other European countries and the way they're conserving and preserving their climate around trees in urban areas as well. I think that might be an additional place that you can look for some recommendations and ideas that you can take advantage of. So that's just my 2 cents that I would add to your radar. But I really appreciated the presentation. Very interesting, very thought-provoking. And I see that Zari has her hand raised, so I want to give her the floor. I will recognize her. And Zari, do you mind introducing yourself? Because you weren't here when we went around and did introductions. And then go ahead and continue with your comment or question.
Thank you very much. My name is Zari Amir Hosseini. I'm the Disability Program Manager at Mass General Hospital and have been a member of this great group for I don't know, over 10 years, I guess. So my question is, I live in South Boston and I see a lot of those trees that we were talking about where the roots are protruding outside on the bricks on the sidewalk. And so a couple of times I've braved it and tried to go over the brick, and that has been really scary with the wheelchair kind of at an angle, trying to get across. So I was just wondering, how do you manage those trees and situations like that? And then if we see trees like that, is there a reporting process?
Well, again, I'll just briefly say something because this might fall more to Kate being part of the Public Works, but as was mentioned earlier, you can make any request like that in 311. So if there's an issue with the sidewalk, again, we'll come out and inspect the tree, and if there's some issue with the tree itself, we may have to remove the tree, and then that would obviously possibly eliminate the situation. But we want to preserve any tree that we can. And when it comes to actually repairing the sidewalk while maintaining the tree, that falls under Public Works, and there's their resources and their strategies to address that. So maybe Kate has a few words about that.
Yeah, so Todd mentioned that my position exists in the Streets Cabinet, and that puts me in a place where I interact with Public Works, I interact with Boston Transportation and others quite often. And we're talking a lot right now with our Public Works construction management staff and others about when you do sidewalk repairs, when you do, when you're responding to requests from the community, how do we respond or repair in such a way that we're really considering the usability, the accessibility of the space. Because I know that historically, it was let's just put the concrete back in, and what they would do is they would make cuts to tree roots, which damages the tree. The concrete would be not level and would be almost as scary as what was there before. Sometimes it was, we'll just slap some asphalt down in place of some brick pavers or something, and again, it was it basically the asphalt falls apart over time, and then you're left with broken asphalt and pavers that are still not level. So that was kind of the standard approach in the past, and what we're trying to work towards now is using what we were discussing before, like using better materials, thinking more about sometimes you need to cut the sidewalk back farther and like really think about the slope that you're creating and the material you're installing. To make sure you're putting back a surface that's better than what was there before. And all of that has to be done while juggling, tree health and making sure that you're not impacting the roots. And I will say that it has been an educational journey to really talk to Public Works and others about these issues, about trees, about accessibility, and about non-standard materials that they should be using. So Todd made a great point, which was really don't shy away from reporting stuff on 311. The more reports and cases we have, the more likely we are to be able to respond to something. And when you do submit reports to 311, or if you contact somebody that at the city and ask them to pass along something, send pictures and make sure you send a good location reference to the location so that we can check it out and like actually see it in person. So the long and short is, please report. We need your advocacy. We need your eyes. And to give a little bit of hope, we are trying to make things a little bit better moving forward than they were in the past. Again, great people. We have a really wonderful team of the city staff that are on this call and others who are all vocally advocating for, for tree health, for accessibility, for better materials, and all these things that were not as present before.
Mrs. West, I would like to recognize Commissioner McCosh. You have the floor.
Thanks,
Go ahead,
Wes.
Commissioner McCosh.
I just want to thank Todd and Kate. That was a great presentation. And just to let our board know that, like Kate just wrapped up by saying, we are your internal advocates. We work very closely with the Streets Cabinet, with certainly with Kate and her team, with Todd and Parks Department. So we pay attention to all these issues. Sometimes from the planning and policy to the actual implementation can take a while. And I know it's frustrating to residents, but I'm glad that they shared all this information with you because the city has changed direction in a lot of ways. So we feel like it's great that we're in these conversations internally, and with the external advocacy that you can provide, all the stronger it will be to have the community's input. So we'll keep you apprised of opportunities to advocate, but please do your individual advocacy by reporting trees that you see. They'll come back to us, we'll meet about them, Public Works will address them, and moving forward, we hope that the city will be a lot more accessible and green. So thank you both for your presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner McCosh, for your comments. So I would like to go ahead with the next part of our agenda for this evening. And again, thank you so much to Todd and Kate for the wonderful presentation. I know that a lot of this was new information and really opened our minds up to another way of thinking. So this information we definitely needed shared with us. So we thank you for your time.
Kate and Todd, can I ask you to leave your email addresses in the chat, please, so folks can reach out to you? I know we sort of cut you short here at the end of the presentation in favor of continuing with our agenda, but we'd love folks to be able to reach out if they need to. Okay. So we will continue on with our agenda, and next on the agenda is me with the chair's report. Okay. So I have 4 things I'd like to discuss during my reports this evening. The first 2 are related to AI, artificial intelligence, and also sports, which I mentioned last month. So you can expect these topics again in this month's report. So with regard to artificial intelligence, give me just 1 second. I'm going to put a link in the chat. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, so I just sent a link. I've just put a link into the chat. Okay. According to recent research by the Society for Human Resource Management, 1 in 4 employers now use AI, artificial intelligence, in their human resources functions. And it is very clear that technology is becoming an increasingly common presence in everything from education to healthcare to the law, etc. With that said, AI may not address bias in any meaningful way. And that includes those with disabilities, and this is a real problem. So the source that I just shared includes a study from Pennsylvania State University. And that's the link that I have put in the chat. This study was done last year, and it found that trained AI models exhibit significant disability bias, and that the researchers warned that this could exacerbate existing social inequalities. So I just wanted to put that on everybody's radar, that this research is ongoing and these findings are pertinent to the work that we're doing here. And that link again is in the chat. With regard to sports, like I mentioned last month, the National Association of the Deaf and the NFL are embroiled in a controversy. So for those of you who watched this year's Super Bowl, you may have noticed that the signers for the national anthem and the halftime show were cut off and not available in a PIP or picture-in-picture. The PIP is a service that provides ASL interpretation feeds for deaf and hard of hearing people. And the TV networks have the ability to provide those feeds through an appropriately sized inset on the larger screen. So if you were seeing the singer during the halftime show, for example, she would take up the bulk of the screen, and then there would be a picture-in-picture frame with the interpreter. So one U.S. congressman named Joe Morell, who is from New York, was so personally disappointed not to see Daniel Durant, who is a deaf actor from the Coda movie. He was signing the national anthem, but Joe Morell couldn't see him. And he said it is definitely possible for the NFL to demand broadcast networks like Fox, CBS, NBC, and ABC to put a picture-in-picture or PIP or split screen in place for deaf performers. Now I can say that disappointingly, the CEO of NAD, the National Association of the Deaf, a man named Howard Rosenblum, did an interview a while back saying that he was not aware of any Super Bowl that had included picture-in-picture throughout the event. But it actually happened in 1993 when Marlee Matlin, a deaf actress who used sign language to perform, while Garth Brooks was singing the national anthem. And picture-in-picture was also shown in 1995, 1998, 1999, and the year 2000. Many people at the moment in the deaf community are upset with the NAD CEO's lack of effort about how the ASL access components are produced for the Super Bowl. And he seems to continue to ignore the suggestions of PIP and would encourage others to view deaf performers on a different screen on live stream on the internet. So it's an entirely different platform. There is potentially more to this controversy, such as a personally beneficial relationship with a high-level network. But that's not the point of my remarks tonight, and I won't be going into details. However, the NAD board has received so many complaints, questions, and concerns with ASL access for the Super Bowl that they are currently investigating the matter. Additionally, the NAD board has placed CEO Howard Rosenblum on administrative leave. With that information, I hope that there will be more transparency from NAD that they will share in upcoming days, as this is an important part of accessibility, very important to the deaf community. So that's AI and sports, and now I have two other pieces that I wanted to speak about, and that will finish up my report. The third topic involves President Biden, who has called for investment in disability services. I don't know about any of you, how many stayed up late last week to watch the State of the Union, but President Biden did mention that he is urging Congress to add funding of $150 billion over 10 years for Medicaid, home, and community-based services. This would greatly meet the current needs, as several disability service providers have struggled in recent years. Nearly half of them have discontinued offerings, and more than 3/4 are refusing or no longer accepting referrals. The fourth item that I wanted to talk about is the Massachusetts House bill, the House 1 bill. I know we're going to talk about the next steps of state captioning and statewide captioning and the medical aid in dying bills under old business later on in our agenda. But I just wanted to let everyone know that I just found out that there is one bill in the State House that has been voted favorably out of the Joint Committee on Children and Families and Persons with Disabilities. And that is the bill to remove outdated and disparaging terms used to describe people with disabilities. For example, words like the R word, we know what that is, disabled, and handicapped appear in several Massachusetts laws. So this bill would push for change of the law as written, and those offensive words will be removed and replaced with more respectful and empowering language. As of February 20th, the bill is still in the House and is ordered for a third reading. Okay, that concludes the chair's report. Any questions or comments? The floor is yours. Yes, Zari, I see your question. The word disabled is included in the text of these laws. Yep.
Hi, so I have a question. Right now, we are using the word disabled in two different ways. One is disability identity first, and then the other one is person first language. If the proposed language is going to change and disability is not going to be used, what are some of the other choices?
This is Wes. Sorry, that's an excellent question. The bill is not clear on that matter, and I have reported what I found, so we don't necessarily know also not only the changes that are being proposed, but where the impetus came from for these changes.
Wes, this is Andrea. I know a little bit of one of those questions. Answer. I believe it is tied to the renaming of the Mass Rehab Commission. So they do a lot more than vocational rehab, and there also is negative connotation in a lot of ways to the term rehabilitation, right? Not everyone with a disability needs to be fixed. No one needs to be fixed, right? No one, that's not what they want to project to the world, right? That people with a disability need rehab or need to be fixed by this state agency. So they're being renamed Mass Ability. And I believe this is all part of the same bill. So if we're going to update one, outdated offensive language from one agency, let's do it in other laws. So I can at least answer that's the impetus.
Thank you, Andrea. I appreciate the clarification. And it makes sense to me. Okay, any other questions, comments, thoughts about the chair's report?
Seeing that it is quiet in this room, I think we can go ahead and move on to the next item on our agenda with the commissioner's report.
Thanks, Wes. I have just a few slides for my report tonight. So we can pull those up. Alrighty, so to give you some updates on the work of our department. I know I've updated you before that we are currently working on a disability data standardization initiative. So this, just to explain it one more time, it's a policy to standardize the way city departments collect data on disabilities, following the lead of the Gender Aware Guidelines, which were launched by the city in 2023. And the policy will include guidance on when, why, how, and what language is used by city departments when they ask residents, job applicants, and employees about identifying any disabilities they may have. And standardizing this data will allow the city to measure data more accurately and use it more effectively. So right now, we may use certain terms, as we just discussed. Some people identify as disabled, some say people with disability, but as far as we know, other departments across the city aren't using those terms or any other terms. What terms are they using? So we want to be able to offer guidance to departments when they talk about disability, like what words to use. When they collect data, why are they collecting it? What are they going to do with the data? And how are they going to use it to measure what? So it's all part of a program that we are trying to launch guidance on. So the background work that we've already completed, last week we held 5 focus groups in partnership with the Disability Policy Consortium. Olivia participated in one of the groups, and I think we had one other board member. Was it Juan Carlos? I'm not sure, that might have been a different group. But we did have a variety of older adults and residents with various disabilities who gave input on language and their thoughts on when it's appropriate to ask about disability, what we will do with the data, explaining what we'll do with the data will make a difference. So we got really great input. We're currently working with the Elections Department in the Office of Human Resources to learn why and how they collect data and how they use data that they collect on disability. So we're doing user test cases to go through the whole process of when you apply for a job, are you asked about having a disability, and how are you asked about it, and what do they do with that information? Similarly, when you vote, when you register to vote, or when you go through the voting process, are there times when you're asked about having a disability? Why is that? What language is used? And what do we do with the information that's collected? Also, our research staff has completed a comprehensive lit review of collecting data on disabilities, so we have best practices from the literature. So next steps, we're working on pulling all of this information together to create a draft document that will guide departments, and we hope to release our final guide standardizing the way the city collects data on disabilities in the spring. So stay tuned for more information on that. And our next slide. I know last month we gave an overview of the CERT program, but I wanted to just give it a little more detail, just to make sure everybody understands, because the deadline is coming up to register if you're interested in volunteering for this program. So CERT is the Community Emergency Response Team, which is a volunteer group of trained residents who can be activated to assist the city's response during an emergency or large-scale event. Boston CERT members are not professional emergency responders. Again, they're just volunteers who are willing to support the community during emergencies and large-scale events. So who are we looking for to volunteer for CERT? You have to be a city resident, and you have to be willing to respond to community needs during an emergency or large-scale event. Anyone who meets those qualifications is encouraged to apply. CERT is also specifically seeking volunteers with disabilities to support the significant population of people who are disabled in the city and who have other functional needs. So the CERT is offering a specific AFN training. AFN stands for Access and Functional Needs. So this is a term that means people who have needs greater than the average non-disabled person or just an average person. So someone who may speak another language, someone who may not have access to transportation, anybody who has needs other than like a typical need during an emergency would may be considered to have access and functional needs. So the CERT is offering a cohort hybrid training for volunteers to learn how to support people with limited abilities who may require assistance before, during, and after an emergency. This includes 9 online modules plus an exam. This piece must be completed by April 16th. And then there's an in-person training component, which will take place from April 27th through May 25th. Registration closes on April 16th, so if you're interested, you can apply at this link. It's clickable when we send out the report, and then it's also written out down below. So we encourage anyone who's interested to please apply. And next slide. Just a list of some upcoming events. The city's free tax prep sites are still happening now through the April 14th, the day before taxes are due. We have multiple sites across the city. We also have the deaf and VIP programs working. VIP is visually impaired program. People who have those disabilities or other disabilities are encouraged to go on the website and look up information if they'd like to get their taxes done. The Youth Jobs and Resource Fair is coming up on March 23rd at the Reggie Lewis Track and Athletic Center. City of Boston Age Strong is hosting an Older Adults Resource Fair on March 28th at the BCYF Center on Paris Street in East Boston. The Mass Office on Disability is having their summit in April this year. Usually it's in the fall. It's being held from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Suffolk University Law School, same place where we host our Disability Community Forum. There will be a networking event from MOD and also awarding the Tom Hopkins Award this year. Again, it will be in April rather than in the fall, so you can sign up if you're interested. It's also a hybrid event, and I believe there's limited availability in person, but online openings are still available. And then our Disability Commission Community Forum, co-hosted by you, the advisory board, will be held on May 1st from 2 to 3:30 p.m. at Suffolk University Law School, same place it was last year. It will also be a hybrid event. And Mayor Wu has committed to attending, so we hope that you can all make it and host it along with me at the front table. And then our ADA Day 2024 is confirmed for July 17th from 12 noon to 2 p.m. on Boston City Hall Plaza. And then finally, I have some public engagement opportunities to share with you. So many of you may have heard that the federal U.S. Department of Transportation has proposed rules related to the mishandling of wheelchairs and scooters, improper transfers to aircraft seats, employee training, and making it easier to hold airlines responsible for damaged wheelchairs. They're seeking public comment on this and other important info, like sizes of lavatories and things like that, through May 13th at this link. This is a big step forward in accessible airline travel, so we encourage any of you to click on the link, read over the proposed rules, and comment if you are so inclined. The city is working on a Blue Hill Transportation Action Plan through the Streets Cabinet. This is a transformative project to improve pedestrian safety, traffic, and climate resilience along Blue Hill Ave. It's a stretch of the city that is prone to a lot of traffic accidents, backed up traffic, unsafe pedestrian conditions, And it's really going to invest millions of dollars into making this stretch much more climate-friendly, pedestrian-friendly, bus-friendly, and we think it will be transformative over the next few years. But the city will be doing robust community engagement before anything's implemented, so we encourage you to get involved through the link in this slide deck. The city's also working on a streets and squares zoning proposal. This is through the BPDA. It's a new zoning initiative that will focus on housing, public space, small businesses, arts and culture, and transportation in neighborhood centers and along main streets. Again, it will kind of map out the way that these spaces are used in a more uniform way so that people can have expectations of zoning when they go to develop things or like create different spaces in the city. So you can get involved by attending numerous events and submitting comments through the link listed here. And also the Mayor's Office of Housing has a 5-year housing plan they're working on to address the needs and priorities in housing, homeless assistance, community development programs that serve low and moderate income residents. This 5-year plan will map out the way the city uses its community development block grant funds. And there is a survey that residents can take. It's available in multiple languages. So we encourage you to get involved and express your thoughts on where you think the money should be spent through the link in the slide deck. And I think that's everything I have on my report, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
This is Wes. Oh, yep. Kinsey was frozen, but she's back now. She's back now. Okay.
Apologies for that. Thank you guys for your patience. Sorry, sometimes those things just happen, and thank you so much for the commissioner for your report. Are there any questions or comments for the commissioner and her report? Seeing none, I think we can move ahead to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, Commissioner Nakash. Any announcements from the board that they would like to share now? Okay, I apologize. I'm just a little bit distracted because my daughter's near me. But anyway, I think we'll go ahead with old business then. We have legislative support for the next steps.
So
And
we are talking about legislative advocacy, and we have 2 state bills. One is the state captioning bill for statewide captioning, and the other is the medical aid in dying, the legislative bill about that. So I think, why don't we start by focusing on the captioning bill statewide? Carl has been advocating for this for several months, and as board chair, I'm not supposed to be making motions, but I would like to see if we can get all board support to write a letter in support of the state captioning bill.
This is Carl. It can't come from me because I work in the building, but I would suggest we write a letter, but when we write the letter to say we would like the bill to be passed to model the Boston captioning ordinance. Because they can still make changes and amendments if it does go to the floor.
thank you, Carl. This is Wes here. Is there any additional comments?
Or Jerry, is your hand raised to make a motion to support or to make a comment?
Wes, this is Jerry. I will make a motion that the board write a letter in support of the statewide legislation, captioning legislation.
Perfect. Who would like to second?
This is Carl, I'll second it.
Wes here. Well, seeing as Carl's second, please indicate if you are in support by raising your hand or saying aye.
Aye.
Great. And perfect. Any opposed? Seeing none, okay, great, I see all the hands went down, so it seems that we are in a unanimous approval, and we will go ahead in writing that support of letter to the city of Boston with the legislation about captioning. Thank you, everybody, I really appreciate that. We will continue on with the letter in support, so thank you. Second issue would be with Medicaid and
The medical aid in dying bill. So we haven't talked about this in a little bit, but I think the board probably is unanimous in feeling that this bill is important to us. And so I'm interested in hearing thoughts and comments about how we might like to proceed around that bill in its current state.
This is Carl. I thought the board was very much divided on which side to go on, and this was kind of a personal matter, so we decided not to take a position on that. Did I read this wrong?
I do see Jerry has his question up maybe in the chat, and I do notice that bill related to,
Zari was asking in the chat which bill we're speaking about, so now we're talking about the medical aid in dying bill. Folks who are, who have a prognosis and who may like to have medical assistance in dying with the assistance of others as opposed to waiting out natural consequences. So, but yes, now we have a response from Zari that she understands which bill we're speaking about. I see Jerry Boyd has his hand raised. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yes, Carl, that was, this is Jerry, just in response to Carl. That was my understanding as well, that that we had heard from both sides, and that the board hadn't taken a position, and was, I thought we were leaning towards being neutral or not voting in favor or against in either way. You know, I don't know if we should formalize that in any way, but that was my understanding as well, Carl.
Jerry, yes, but we didn't have that formal voting vote done. So yes, I do agree that that was what we had reached, was a neutral position at the time, but it hasn't been formalized. So would we like to go ahead with that and finalize that?
This is Carl. I don't know if we have to formalize not taking a position. I mean, I'm happy to make a motion, but I don't know that you have to formalize not having a position.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea. We had talked about that would be the way to end it, right? To take a formal vote to remain neutral would be a way to get it, you know.
Okay,
Having made that decision and get it out of old business.
thank you. Then I'll make a motion that we vote to, at this time, to have the Boston Disability Commission members remain neutral as a whole.
This is Paul, I second Carl.
I just wanted to reiterate what Carl had said, is that the board will continue, in this vote, we are deciding to remain neutral on the issue of the medical aid in dying bill. And we will encourage board members to make individual decisions as to whether or not they want to support the bill and in what ways they would like to advocate, particularly for the medical aid in dying bill, but also about the captioning bill. At the same time, we as the board will remain neutral. Our position as a board will be neutral on this bill. So that's what the motion involves.
Yes.
Okay, this is Wes. We need a second to Carl's motion.
This is Paul, I second the motion.
Thank you very much, Paul. All in favor, please raise your hands or indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
This is Jerry. I have a question before we vote, if that's okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I should raise my hand or not. Go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you. Just so that I'm clear, will our only formal declaration of this be through the meeting minutes, or will this be publicized anywhere, or where will this motion or declaration be publicized, publicized or formalized?
This is Wes. The answer to your question is both. Yes. At the same time, we will be asking each, again, individual board member to make their own personal decision as to how they perceive the bill and whether they would be interested in advocating on either side of it. But the commission will remain neutral.
Right, understood. But you said, I'm sorry, Wes, but you said both. So is it just going to be in the meeting minutes, or will it be somewhere else as well?
We will announce our neutrality as well as putting it in the minutes.
Okay, where will that be announced? Do we know at this time?
Jerry, are you asking that you want us to write a letter? Is that what you're asking?
No. I'm just asking, in order to get this, again, sometimes, the only formal thing only formal place where things are kept are in meeting minutes, which is fine with me, but I didn't know whether, this would stimulate a letter or not, so. That's all I was asking.
Carl, I don't think we need to take a letter. I think it's fine if it's reflected in the meeting minutes, and we can point people to the meeting minutes if they have any questions.
Great.
That's my opinion. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
And that was mine as well. I just wanted to clarify.
This is Wes. So I would defer to what Carl says. The board, or the commission is remaining neutral. That will be our position as mentioned in the minutes. And I don't know that we need to have a public announcement in addition to the minutes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Now I see two hands raised. So let's go to Zari. And then after that, we'll have Richard. Go ahead, Zari.
Okay, so just as a follow-up to Jerry's question, I understand if you want to just leave it at the minutes, but this is such a highly contested, or I don't know what the word is, but dividing conversation among the disability community, that I just feel very strongly that at some point someone will come back and question us, say, why would you be neutral? I don't know. I guess I'm playing the devil's advocate, thinking that I don't necessarily, I'm not suggesting we should publicize, but I also don't want to just kind of not deal with it in a way that we just put it in the minutes and say, well, we just talked about it and that's that. I mean, either we stand by even that neutrality or we don't, you know, and that in itself is pretty strong to me, because what it does, it speaks to the power of people with disabilities in the fact that we're not just all going to always go one way or the other just because we all have a disability. That, in fact, like you said, Wes, we can make individual decisions, but as a group, we have decided to be neutral.
Hi, I just want to jump in. It's Kristen McCosh, Commissioner. Zari, one of the reasons behind this is that the board was split, literally 50-50 on those who supported it and those who didn't. So there is no consensus among the board, nor does there have to be, because it's a state law. So it's not something that you have any, power to affect anyway as a board. It was just, taking a vote on how you felt about it. But I would agree with Carl that it can be reflected in the minutes. Many organizations are staying neutral. I know we heard from both sides, but it also doesn't tell the full story. There's a lot, as we talked about many times, there's a lot involved in this bill, in these bills. So I think that staying neutral was the decision of the board because there was no consensus, and that seems to still be the case. So I don't think it's imperative that you take a position as a board because there isn't.
This is Wes. Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that clarification, that additional information. I would also say that while the board is remaining neutral, I can present that the Boston Center for Independent Living, BCIL, their board has announced that they will also be remaining neutral on this bill. And also we had two presentations, one on the medical aid and dying bill, and the other presenter from
Second thought.
our former Commissioner of Disabilities Office. So we had the gentleman who was against the bill and the folks who were in support of the bill. I think we did our due diligence with regards to hearing from both sides and being really thoughtful, but we were not able, as several folks have said, to come to a consensus. And so I feel more comfortable moving forward that the board remain neutral. But again, I would say that board members are free and are encouraged to be supportive or against that bill in whatever their personal circumstances reflect. And so I think that's important that we're operating both as a board and as individuals with opinions. Richard, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. I've studied the bills. I think we should support them. And I would like at least to register my vote as suggesting that the board should support them. I have no problem with the minutes saying the board was divided or whatever, but I feel strongly about this issue, and I'd like the record to reflect that I think we should support it.
This is Wes. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. That will be reflected in the minutes. Sarah, you still have your hand up. Did you want to say something else or ask another question? Okay, Sarah seems to have taken her hand down, so I guess that is resolved. So I think this issue is also resolved. We've discussed both bills, and we are in favor as a board of remaining neutral on the medical aid and dying bill. So thank you very much. I know it is a sensitive issue that we've spent a lot of time and been very thoughtful about. So I appreciate that from all of you. And bear with me just 1 second. Okay, if we move on in our agenda, the next thing that I see is new business. Do we have any new business? Any topics or agenda, or excuse me, items to be discussed under new business? Okay, I guess we can continue further. The next item on our agenda is public input. Any members of the public who would like to comment?
This is Andrea with the commission. If you would like to make a comment, please indicate in the chat with the raise hand function or on your camera. I can send you a request to unmute so that you can make your question or comment, and you will have 2 minutes.
Yes, 2 minutes. Thanks for that clarification. That's an important reminder. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes. Okay, this is Wes. I have also, I'm getting some feedback from my almost 7-month-year-old child. So it's almost St. Patrick's Day, and part of my chair's report mentioned that also. I saw my daughter, who will be 7 months. She's wearing, she'll be 7 months on St. Patrick's Day. She brought me some artwork from childcare, from daycare, so I thought I would show it to you all as a way to close out our meeting. This is the image. Oh, but if I hold it close to the camera, it gets blurry. Hang on one second. Let me see if I can figure this out. Okay, it says Happy St. Patrick's Day. There's a rainbow. And it's her footprint that is the shadow of the rainbow on the pot of gold. They made a black ink footprint from her. And I have another piece as well, which is her handprint as the body of a leprechaun. And it says, "May the luck of the Irish be with you." And these are 2 pieces of art that she created with the help of her teachers at childcare. Oh, and come here. Okay. This is her. This is she, the artist herself. She's going to be 7 months old on St. Patrick's Day. Say hi, sweetie. Say hi. This is what you made. She's looking
Wes,
very-
this is Jerry. I just have to say that's adorable, and it's a great positive way to end this or any meeting. So,
Jerry, do you want to make the motion this time?
no, please, Carl.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
This is Wes. All in favor, please
Aye.
acknowledge by
Aye.
saying aye,
Aye.
raising your hands. Thank you very much, everyone.
Have a good night and happy St. Patty's Day.
Wes, it's fitting that